The alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 a.m., and Jessica groaned as she reached over to hit the snooze button. She had barely slept 3 hours, staying up late to finish her presentation for the biggest business conference of the year. Her small marketing company was struggling, and this conference in Seattle could be the break she desperately needed. 3 potential clients were waiting to meet with her, and if she could land even one of them, it would save her business. She jumped out of bed and rushed through her morning routine: coffee, quick shower, and grabbing the suitcase she had packed the night before. The taxi was already waiting outside her Chicago apartment building. As she settled into the back seat, Jessica checked her phone one more time. Flight departure at 11:45 a.m., and it was now 9:30. She had plenty of time, or so she thought. Traffic was worse than usual. The taxi driver, an older man with kind eyes, kept glancing at her through the rearview mirror. "First time flying for business?" he asked, noticing her nervous energy. "Not really," Jessica replied, still reviewing her notes. "But this trip is really important. My whole company depends on it." "Well, don't worry too much. Sometimes the best opportunities come when we least expect them," the driver said with a smile that Jessica didn't fully catch because she was too focused on her presentation. When they finally reached O'Hare Airport, Jessica's heart sank. The place was packed. Long lines everywhere, delayed flights on the departure board, and what looked like chaos at every turn. She paid the driver quickly and grabbed her luggage, practically running toward the entrance. The check-in line moved, like molasses. Jessica kept checking her watch, her leg bouncing with anxiety. The woman in front of her had 3 large suitcases and seemed to be arguing with the airline staff about weight limits. Behind her, a family with crying babies was creating quite a scene. Jessica felt her stress levels rising by the minute. Finally, after what felt like hours but was really only 45 minutes, she got her boarding pass. Security was the next challenge. The TSA line stretched back so far she couldn't even see the end of it. Her phone showed 10:45 a.m. Boarding would start in 30 minutes, and she still had to get through security and find her gate. As she waited in the security line, Jessica struck up a conversation with a businessman behind her. He was wearing an expensive suit and seemed surprisingly calm despite the chaos around them. They talked about travel delays and the stress of business trips. He mentioned he flew frequently and had learned to always expect the unexpected. "The key is not to let the stress consume you," he said, adjusting his tie. "Sometimes delays happen for a reason we don't understand yet." Jessica found his calmness oddly comforting, though she was still worried about making her flight. When she finally got through security, it was 11:15 a.m. She had 30 minutes to find her gate and board the plane. Running through the terminal with her rolling suitcase bouncing behind her, Jessica felt like she was in one of those travel movies, where everything goes wrong. Her gate was in Terminal B, which seemed miles away. She passed restaurants, shops, and dozens of other stressed travelers, all seemingly in the same rush she was in. The gate was finally in sight. B12. She could see people already boarding, and her heart rate slowed down just a bit. She had made it, just barely. But she had made it. Jessica slowed her pace slightly, catching her breath and checking her phone for any last-minute messages from her assistant back home. That's when she saw him. About 20 feet ahead, near the boarding area, a man in a dark business suit was on the ground. He wasn't moving much, and his briefcase had fallen open beside him, papers scattered across the floor. Other passengers were walking around him, some stopping to look, but no one was actually helping. Jessica stopped in her tracks. The businessman from the security line was now lying on the cold airport floor, looking pale and disoriented. His eyes were open, but he seemed confused, like he didn't know where he was. For a moment, Jessica hesitated. Her boarding group was being called. She could see the gate agent scanning tickets and passengers moving toward the jet bridge. This was her flight. The flight that could save her business. The flight she absolutely could not miss. But looking at the man on the ground, she knew she couldn't just walk past him. Her mother had always taught her that you help people when they need it, no matter what else is going on in your life. It was one of those lessons that stick with you forever. Jessica dropped her suitcase right there in the middle of the terminal and rushed to the man's side. She knelt down beside him, her conference material scattered on the floor around her luggage. "Sir, are you okay? Can you hear me?" she asked, her voice gentle but urgent. The man looked up at her with grateful but confused eyes. I'm not sure what happened," he said weakly. "I was walking to my gate and then everything started spinning." Jessica could see that he was sweating despite the air conditioning, and his breathing seemed shallow. She had taken a basic first aid course years ago, and something about his condition worried her. This wasn't just someone who had tripped and fallen. "Just stay still for a moment," she told him, pulling out her phone. "I'm going to call for help." As she dialed 911, Jessica glanced toward her gate. The boarding line was getting shorter. She could hear the final boarding announcements, echoing through the terminal. Her flight was leaving, and she was going to miss it. The 911 operator answered on the second ring. 911, what's your emergency? I'm at O'Hare Airport Terminal B near Gate 12. There's a man here who appears to be having some kind of medical emergency. He's conscious but seems disoriented and is having trouble breathing. While she was on the phone with the operator, Jessica loosened the man's tie and made sure there was nothing blocking his airway. She had remembered that much from her first aid training. Other passengers were starting to gather around, but most seemed more curious than helpful. "What's your name?" Jessica asked the man softly while they waited for paramedics. "David," he replied, his voice a bit stronger now. "David Thompson. Thank you for stopping. I saw other people walk by, but you're the first person to actually help." "Don't worry about it," Jessica said, though she couldn't help but glance once more toward her gate. The boarding area was almost empty now. Her flight was definitely leaving without her. David noticed her looking toward the gate. "Oh no, are you missing your flight because of me? Please don't do that, I'll be fine." "No way," Jessica said firmly. "Flights can be rescheduled. Your health can't wait." The paramedics arrived within 10 minutes, which felt like an hour to Jessica. They quickly assessed David's condition and determined that he needed to go to the hospital for proper evaluation. As they prepared to transport him, David grabbed Jessica's hand. "I don't even know your name," he said. Jessica Williams." "Jessica, I can't thank you enough. You could have just walked past like everyone else, but you didn't. That means more to me than you know." As the paramedics wheeled David away, Jessica stood in the now nearly empty terminal area, watching her gate close and her flight taxi away from the window. She had just missed the most important business trip of her life to help a complete stranger. Part of her felt sick about it, but a bigger part of her knew she had done the right thing. Little did she know that this single act of kindness would change both of their lives forever. Jessica stood in the empty terminal area, watching her plane pull away from the gate through the large windows. The reality of what had just happened hit her like a ton of bricks. She had missed her flight. The flight that could have saved her, struggling business. The flight that 3 potential clients were expecting her to be on in Seattle. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her assistant back home. "Hope your flight went well. The Johnson Group called again about tomorrow's meeting. They seem really excited to work with us." Jessica's heart sank even further. The Johnson Group was the biggest potential client she had ever pitched to. Missing this conference meant missing her chance to meet with them face to face. In the consulting business, personal relationships were everything, and video calls just weren't the same as a handshake and a cup of coffee. She quickly called her assistant. "Hey Lisa, I've got some bad news. I missed my flight." "What? How did that happen? You left so early this morning." Jessica explained the situation briefly, trying not to sound as frustrated as she felt. "I need you to call the airline and see if there are any other flights to Seattle today. Also, reach out to all my meetings and see if we can push them back by a day." "I'll get right on it," Lisa said, but Jessica could hear the worry in her voice. They both knew how important this trip was. After hanging up, Jessica realized she should probably check on David. She felt responsible for him now, having been the one to call the ambulance. The paramedics had taken him to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, which was about 20 minutes from the airport. She grabbed her luggage and headed to the taxi stand, her mind racing with all the things she needed to reschedule. The taxi driver was different this time, a young woman who seemed to sense Jessica's stress. Rough day? The driver asked as they pulled away from the airport. You could say that, Jessica replied, staring out the window at the Chicago skyline. Sometimes doing the right thing feels like the wrong thing, you know? I get that, the driver nodded. But usually when we look back later, we realize why things happened the way they did. At the hospital, Jessica found David in the emergency room. He was sitting up in bed looking much better than he had at the airport. The color had returned to his face and he seemed more alert. When he saw her walk in, his face lit up with, "Surprise, Jessica, you came to check on me? You really didn't have to do that. I wanted to make sure you were okay," she said, taking a seat in the chair next to his bed. "What did the doctor say?" David looked a bit embarrassed. "Severe dehydration and exhaustion. Apparently, I've been pushing myself too hard lately. Working 16-hour days, forgetting to eat, barely drinking water. My body just decided to shut down for a bit." "That's serious," Jessica said, genuinely concerned. "You could have passed out while driving or something even worse." The doctor said the same thing. "He wants to keep me here for a few more hours. To make sure I'm fully hydrated, then I'm supposed to take it easy for the next few days." David paused, looking at her with curious eyes. "But what about your flight? Please tell me you didn't miss it because of me." Jessica tried to smile, but she couldn't hide her disappointment completely. "I did miss it, but it's okay. These things happen." "No, it's not okay," David said, sitting up straighter. "What was the flight for? Was it important?" Something about David's genuine concern made Jessica open up more than she usually would with a stranger. Maybe it was the stress of the day, or maybe it was just his kind eyes. But she found herself telling him about her struggling business, the conference, and how missing this trip might mean the end of everything she had worked for. "I started my consulting company 3 years ago," she explained. "It was going well for a while, but then the economy got tough, and small businesses like mine were the first to suffer. This conference was supposed to be my chance to land some big clients and turn things around." David listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about her business and nodding along as she spoke. He seemed genuinely interested in her work, not just making polite conversation. "You know," David said, after she finished explaining her situation, "sometimes the best opportunities come from the most unexpected places. I've learned that in my own business experience." "What kind of work do you do?" Jessica asked, realizing she knew very little about the man she had helped. David hesitated for a moment. "I'm in the transportation industry. I work with airlines and travel companies, helping them improve their operations and customer service." It wasn't technically a lie, Jessica would later learn, but it wasn't the whole truth either. A nurse came in to check David's IV and blood pressure. While she worked, Jessica's phone rang. It was Lisa with an update. "Good news and bad news," Lisa said. "The bad news is there are no more flights to Seattle today. Everything is booked solid. The good news is I managed to get you on the first flight tomorrow morning, and I was able to reschedule most of your meetings for a day later." "What about the Johnson Group?" Jessica asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. "They were understanding, but they mentioned they're also meeting with 2 other consulting firms while they're in town. Pushing back might hurt our chances." Jessica closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "Okay, do the best you can. I'll be there tomorrow." When she hung up, David was looking at her with concern. "Everything okay?" "I got a flight for tomorrow morning, but I might have lost my biggest potential client because of the delay." "I'm so sorry," David said, and Jessica could tell he really meant it. "This is all my fault. If there's anything I can do to help make this right—" "Don't be silly," Jessica interrupted. "You couldn't control having a medical emergency. Besides, what could you possibly do about my business problems?" David was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider something carefully. "Well, I do know a lot of people in the business world. Maybe I could make some introductions, give you some advice on how to approach these potential clients." Jessica was touched by his offer, but she didn't want to burden him with her problems. "That's really kind of you, but you should focus on taking care of yourself right now." The nurse finished her checks and left them alone again. David's doctor came by a few minutes later with good news. His blood work looked good and he could go home as long as he promised to rest and stay hydrated. "Do you have someone who can pick you up?" Jessica asked as David got ready to leave. "I was planning to take a taxi back to get my car at the airport," he said. "Absolutely not," Jessica said firmly. "You just had a medical emergency. I'm not letting you travel alone. I'll give you a ride." "You've done more than enough already," David protested. "It's not up for discussion," Jessica said with a smile. "Besides, I don't have anywhere else to be until tomorrow morning." During the drive back to the airport to get David's car, they talked more about their lives and work. Jessica found David surprisingly easy to talk to. He was a good listener, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. It had been a long time since she had met someone who made conversation feel so natural and comfortable. When they reached the airport parking garage, David turned to Jessica before getting out of her car. "I know this might sound strange since we just met under such unusual circumstances, but would you like to have dinner tonight? It's the least I can do after you gave up your flight to help me." Jessica hesitated. She had a million things to do to prepare for tomorrow's rescheduled meetings, and she barely knew this man, but something about David made her want to say yes. "Okay," she said, surprising herself, "but somewhere casual. It's been a long day." "I know just the place." David smiled. "There's a little Italian restaurant downtown that makes the best pasta, in Chicago. Nothing fancy, just good food and good conversation." As Jessica drove home to change clothes and prepare for an unexpected dinner date, she couldn't help but wonder if missing her flight might not have been such a disaster after all. Jessica woke up the next morning feeling more rested than she had in weeks. Her dinner with David the night before had been wonderful. They had talked for hours at the cozy Italian restaurant, sharing stories about their childhoods, their dreams, and their fears. David was intelligent, funny, and surprisingly down-to-earth despite his expensive clothes and obvious success. She had learned that he grew up in Detroit, the son of a factory worker and a school teacher. He had worked his way through college, taking night classes while working full-time jobs during the day. His work ethic was impressive, though Jessica could see how it had led to yesterday's health scare. What struck her most was how he treated everyone around him. At the restaurant, he was kind to the waitress, remembered her name, and asked about her studies when she mentioned she was in college. He left a generous tip, but did it quietly without making a show of it. These small gestures told Jessica more about his character than any expensive suit could. Now, as she packed her suitcase for the rescheduled trip, Jessica found herself looking forward to seeing David again. He had insisted on driving her to the airport this morning, saying it was the least he could do after everything she had done for him. Her phone buzzed with a text from him. "Good morning. Hope you slept well. I'll be there in 20 minutes to pick you up. Looking forward to making sure you actually make your flight this time." Jessica smiled as she read the message. It was sweet of him to care so much about her getting to Seattle safely. When David arrived, Jessica was surprised to see him driving a fairly modest car. Given his expensive suits and obvious business success, she had expected something more flashy. But the black sedan was nice without being showy, which seemed to fit his personality perfectly. "Ready for take two?" David asked as she got into the passenger seat. "More ready than I was yesterday, that's for sure." Jessica laughed. "Thanks again for driving me. You really didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," David said simply. "Besides, I have some business to take care of at the airport. Anyway." As they drove through the Chicago morning traffic, Jessica noticed that David seemed a bit nervous. He kept adjusting his tie and checking his phone more than usual. When she asked if everything was okay, he said he was fine. Just had an important meeting later that day. "Speaking of meetings," Jessica said, "I still can't believe you offered to help me with business advice yesterday. That was really kind of you." David glanced at her quickly before looking back at the road. "I meant what I said. I've been in business for a while now, and I've learned a thing or two about dealing with difficult clients and challenging situations." "What exactly do you do in the transportation industry?" Jessica asked. "You were pretty vague about it last night." David was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I'm involved in airline operations. I help companies improve their Efficiency and customer satisfaction. It was true, Jessica would later realize, but it was also a massive understatement. When they arrived at the airport, David surprised Jessica by parking in a special area she had never seen before. Instead of the regular passenger drop-off, he drove to what looked like a private entrance with security guards who seemed to know him. "This is different," Jessica said, looking around at the unfamiliar area. "I have some connections here," David said, looking more nervous than ever. "Actually, Jessica, there's something I need to tell you before you go in." Something in his tone made Jessica's stomach flip. Was he married? Did he have some terrible secret? Had she completely misjudged his character? "What is it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. David took a deep breath and looked directly at her. "I haven't been completely honest with you about what I do for work." Jessica's heart started beating faster. "What do you mean?" "I don't just work with airlines," David said slowly. "I own one. Actually, I own the airline you're flying on today. Skyline Airways." Jessica stared at him in complete shock. "What?" "My full name is David Thompson, and I'm the CEO and owner of Skyline Airways," he continued, his words coming out in a rush. "I was at the airport yesterday because I often travel as a regular passenger to see how our operations are working from the customer's perspective. I don't usually tell people who I am because I want to get honest feedback." Jessica felt like the world was spinning around her. "You're telling me that the man I helped yesterday, the man who collapsed at the airport, owns the entire airline?" "Yes," David said quietly. "And I know how this must sound, but everything I told you about myself is true. I did grow up in Detroit. My parents were a factory worker and a teacher, and I did work my way through college. Building this airline has been my life's work, but it's also the reason I ended up in the hospital yesterday. I've been pushing myself too hard because I care so much about the company." Jessica was silent for a long moment, trying to process this information. "So when you offered to help me with business advice—" "I genuinely want to help you," David said quickly. "Not because of who I am or what I have, but because of who you are. Jessica, you were the only person in that entire airport who stopped to help me. Dozens of people walked past, including some of my own employees who didn't recognize me. But you gave up the most important flight of your life to help a complete stranger." "Your employees were there?" Jessica asked, still trying to understand everything. "Several of them. Gate agents, flight attendants, even some managers. They all walked right past me because I was just another passenger to them. But you saw someone who needed help and you didn't hesitate." Jessica felt overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say. This is crazy." "I know it is," David said. "And I know you probably think I should have told you sooner. But I wanted you to get to know me as David, not as the CEO of an airline. I wanted our conversation last night to be real, not influenced by what I do for a living." "It was real," Jessica said softly, realizing that despite her shock, she didn't feel like David had been lying to her. He had been careful about how he described his work, but everything else about him had been genuine. "Jessica, there's something else," David said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "I upgraded your flight to first class, and I've arranged for someone from our customer service team to meet you in Seattle. If you're willing, I'd like to help you with your business meetings, not because I feel guilty about yesterday, but because I genuinely believe in what you're doing." He handed her a new boarding pass and what looked like a business card. But when Jessica looked at the card, she realized it wasn't just any business card. It was David's personal card, with his direct phone number and email address. "You don't have to accept my help," David continued, "but I want you to know that the offer is genuine. I've met a lot of business people over the years, and most of them would have walked right past me yesterday without a second thought. You're different. Jessica, you have something that can't be taught or bought: genuine compassion and integrity." Jessica looked at the boarding pass in her hands. First class on Skyline Airways, with a note that read, "Thank you for your kindness, DT." "I still can't believe this is real," she said, shaking her head. "Yesterday I was just trying to catch a flight, and now I'm sitting in a car with the owner of the airline talking about business partnerships. Life has a funny way of surprising us," David said with a small smile. "But Jessica, I need you to know that regardless of what happens with business, I hope we can stay in touch. Last night was one of the best conversations I've had in years, and it had nothing to do with airlines or money or any of that. It was just two people getting to know each other. Jessica felt her cheeks warm. Despite her shock about David's identity, she couldn't deny that she felt the same way about their evening together. I'd like that too, she said honestly. David smiled, and Jessica could see the relief in his eyes. Good. Now let's get you on that flight, and Jessica, this time I'm personally making sure nothing goes wrong. As they walked into the airport together, Jessica couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. 24 hours ago, she was just another stressed business traveler trying to catch a flight. Now she was walking through a private airport entrance with a man who owned the airline, holding a first-class ticket and a direct line to one of the most successful business owners in the country. But more than that, she was walking with David, the man who had made her laugh over pasta the night before, who had listened to her dreams and fears, and who had somehow managed to turn the worst travel day of her life into something that felt like the beginning of an adventure. The flight to Seattle was unlike anything Jessica had ever experienced. First class on Skyline Airways was amazing, but what made it special wasn't the comfortable seats or the fancy food. It was the little note waiting at her seat that simply said, "Hope your meetings go perfectly. You've got this." David, the flight attendant, a friendly woman named Carol, seemed to know exactly who Jessica was without her having to say anything. "Mr. Thompson asked us to take extra good care of you today," Carol said with a warm smile. "He also mentioned you're in Seattle for some important business meetings. Best of luck." Jessica couldn't help but smile. Even though she was still processing the shock of David's real identity, his thoughtfulness made her heart flutter in a way she hadn't felt in years. When she landed in Seattle, there was indeed someone from Skyline Airways customer service waiting for her, just as David had promised. A professional woman named Patricia helped Jessica with her luggage and arranged for a car to take her directly to her hotel. "Mr. Thompson wanted to make sure your trip went smoothly," Patricia explained as they walked through the airport. "He also asked me to give you this." She handed Jessica a small envelope with her name written on it in David's handwriting. Inside was a simple card that read, "Seattle has the best coffee in the world. Try Pike Place Market if you get a chance. Call me when you're settled in. I'd love to hear how your meetings go." At the bottom was his personal cell phone number. Jessica's business meetings went better than she had ever imagined. The Johnson Group, her most important potential client, was impressed with her presentation and seemed genuinely interested in working with her. But what surprised her most was that during their conversation, they mentioned they had heard great things about her company from a mutual contact in Chicago. "Someone reached out to us yesterday evening," Mr. Johnson explained. "They spoke very highly of your work and suggested we should definitely consider partnering with you. They seem to know quite a bit about both your company and ours." Jessica had a pretty good idea who that mutual contact might have been, but she didn't say anything. If David had helped her behind the scenes, he had done it so carefully that it didn't feel like charity or interference. That evening, after her successful meetings, Jessica found herself walking through Pike Place Market, just as David had suggested. The famous fish-throwing vendors, the fresh flowers, and the incredible smells from dozens of food stalls were exactly the kind of experience she needed after a stressful few days. She bought a cup of coffee from a small stand and found a quiet spot to call David. He answered on the second ring. "Jessica, how did the meetings go?" His voice was warm and genuinely excited to hear from her. "Really well, actually. Better than I expected," Jessica said, taking a sip of her coffee. "And I have a feeling you might have had something to do with that." David was quiet for a moment. "I may have made a phone call or two, but only to people I genuinely thought would be a good fit for your services. I would never recommend someone I didn't believe in." "Thank you," Jessica said softly. "But you didn't have to do that. I wanted to. Besides, from what I told them about your work, they were already interested before I mentioned the personal recommendation." They talked for over an hour. David told her about his day, which had been filled with meetings and conference calls, while Jessica described the sights and sounds of Pike Place Market. It felt natural and comfortable, like they had been friends for years instead of days. "I have to ask you something," Jessica said as their conversation was winding down. "Why are you being so nice to me? I mean, you're this successful businessman and I'm just me." "Just you?" David's voice sounded genuinely surprised. "Jessica, you gave up the most important business trip of your life to help a stranger. You spent your evening in a hospital emergency room with someone you barely knew. Most people I meet are nice to me because of what I can do for them. You were kind to me when you thought I was just some guy in a suit who had collapsed at the airport." Jessica felt her cheeks warm, even though David couldn't see her blush through the phone. "Besides," David continued, "you're not just anything. You're smart, funny, caring, and you built a business from nothing while caring more about doing good work than making quick money. That's pretty impressive in my book." Over the following weeks, David and Jessica talked almost every day. Sometimes it was just a quick text to say good morning or share something funny that had happened during their day. Other times they would spend hours on video calls talking about everything from their favorite movies to their biggest dreams and fears. Jessica learned that despite his success, David often felt lonely. Running an airline meant constant travel, long hours, and relationships that were mostly about business. He told her about failed relationships where women were more interested in his bank account than his personality, and how he had almost given up on finding someone who would love him for who he was rather than what he had. "That's why I didn't tell you who I was right away," he admitted during one of their late-night calls. "I wanted you to get to know David the person, not David the CISO." "I get that," Jessica said. "It must be hard to know if people genuinely like you or if they're just interested in what you can give them." David started finding reasons to visit Seattle. At first it was legitimate business trips. Skyline Airways had several partner companies in the Pacific Northwest, and there were always meetings to attend or operations to review. But Jessica began to suspect that David was creating some of these business needs just to have an excuse to see her. Their first official date in Seattle was at a small coffee shop in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. David had insisted on somewhere casual where they could just talk without any fancy atmosphere or expensive food getting in the way. He showed up in jeans and a simple sweater, looking more relaxed than Jessica had ever seen him. "You look different when you're not in a business suit," Jessica said as they sat down with their coffee. "Good different or bad different?" David asked with a grin. "Definitely good different. More like the guy I talked to in the hospital than the airline CEO." They spent 3 hours in that coffee shop, talking and laughing until the staff started giving them looks that suggested they should probably order more coffee or give up their table. When they finally left, David walked Jessica back to her apartment, and they stood outside her building talking for another hour. "I should probably let you get some sleep," David said eventually, though he didn't seem eager to leave. "I should probably get some work done," Jessica agreed, though she was enjoying their conversation too much to want it to end. "Same time next week?" David asked. "I mean, if you want to. I think I can find another business reason to be in Seattle." Jessica laughed. "You know you don't need a business reason, right? You can just visit because you want to." "I'll keep that in mind," David said, and Jessica could see something shift in his expression, like he was realizing that maybe he didn't have to keep justifying his feelings or his actions. Their second date was at Pike Place Market, where David insisted on trying every food sample available and buying Jessica flowers from 3 different vendors because he couldn't decide which ones were prettiest. Their third date was a cooking class where they laughed so hard at their terrible attempts at making pasta that the instructor asked them to quiet down. Each time they were together, Jessica found herself caring less about David's money and success, and more about the way he made her laugh, the way he listened when she talked about her work, and the way he seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions about everything from current events to her favorite childhood memories. But it was the small gestures that really won her heart. When she mentioned she was stressed about a difficult client, David sent her a care package with her favorite tea and a note that said, "Remember, you're amazing at what you do." When she had to work late several nights in a row, he had dinner delivered to her office from her favorite restaurant with a card that read, "Don't forget to eat." David never made her feel like his help came with strings attached or expectations. He seemed to genuinely enjoy making her life a little easier, not because he wanted something in return, but because he cared about her happiness. One evening, after they had been talking regularly for about 2 months, Jessica realized something that both excited and terrified her. She was falling in love with David Thompson. Not the airline owner, not the successful businessman, but the man who remembered that she liked extra foam in her coffee and who called her just to hear about her day. 6 months had passed since that chaotic day at O'Hare Airport, and Jessica's life had completely transformed. Her business was thriving thanks to the clients she had met at the rescheduled conference, and more importantly, she had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for: love with David. Their relationship had grown stronger with each passing week. Despite David's busy schedule running Skyline Airways, he always made time for Jessica. They had developed their own little traditions: Sunday morning video calls where they would drink coffee together from their respective cities, random text messages throughout the day sharing funny moments or interesting thoughts, and David's surprise visits to Seattle that had become less about business and more about spending time together. Jessica had also spent several weekends in Chicago, where David showed her parts of the city she had never seen despite living there for years. He took her to small neighborhood restaurants that had been family-owned for generations, jazz clubs where local musicians played intimate sets, and quiet parks where they could walk and talk without the noise of the busy city around them. What Jessica loved most about their relationship was how normal it felt. Yes, David owned an airline and had more money than she could ever imagine. But when they were together, he was just David, the man who laughed at her terrible jokes, who helped her cook dinner even though he was a disaster in the kitchen, and who listened to her talk about her work challenges with genuine interest and helpful advice. One Tuesday morning in early spring, Jessica received an unexpected call from David's assistant, Patricia. "Hi, Jessica, this is Patricia from Mr. Thompson's office. He asked me to call you about a special flight arrangement." "A special flight?" Jessica asked, confused. "I don't have any trips planned right now. Mr. Thompson would like to invite you on a special Skyline Airways flight this Saturday morning. He said to tell you it's a scenic tour of the Pacific Northwest, and you'd be back by evening. All you need to do is be at Seattle Airport at 8 a.m. Everything else is taken care of." Jessica was puzzled but intrigued. David had mentioned wanting to show her the beautiful mountains and coastline of the region from the air, but she thought he was just making casual conversation. "Did he say anything else about this flight?" Jessica asked. "Just that you should wear something comfortable and that it's going to be a day you'll never forget," Patricia said with a smile in her voice that Jessica could hear even over the phone. When Saturday morning arrived, Jessica found herself at a private area of Seattle Airport she had never seen before. A Skyline Airways representative met her and escorted her to a small, beautiful aircraft that looked nothing like the large commercial plane she was used to flying on. "This is one of our executive jets," the representative explained. "Mr. Thompson thought you might enjoy a more intimate flying experience today." As Jessica boarded the plane, she was surprised to find that she was the only passenger. The cabin was luxurious but not overly fancy, with comfortable leather seats and large windows that would provide amazing views of the landscape below. A flight attendant welcomed her aboard and offered her coffee and pastries, but Jessica was too excited and curious about what David had planned to think about food. She kept looking around for him, expecting him to appear at any moment. As the plane prepared for takeoff, the captain's voice came over the intercom, but instead of the usual pre-flight announcements, Jessica heard something that made her heart skip a beat. "Good morning, Jessica. This is your captain speaking." It was David's voice. "I hope you're comfortable back there because we're about to take off on a journey that I hope will be as special for you as it is for me." Jessica couldn't believe what she was hearing. David was actually piloting the plane himself. She had no idea he even knew how to fly. "You're probably wondering why I'm the one flying this plane instead of sitting back there with you." David's voice continued over the intercom. "Well, there's something I never told you about myself. Before I became obsessed with running an airline, I was obsessed with actually flying planes. I got my pilot's license when I was 22. And even though I don't get to fly much anymore because of my business responsibilities, it's still one of my favorite things in the world. As the plane lifted off and began climbing into the clear, morning sky, Jessica pressed her face to the window to watch Seattle grow smaller below them. The view was absolutely breathtaking. "I've been thinking a lot lately about how we met," David's voice continued, "about how you were rushing to catch a flight that could have changed your business and how you gave up that opportunity to help someone you didn't even know. I've been thinking about how that single act of kindness led to the best relationship of my life." Jessica felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She had no idea where David was going with this, but his words were touching her heart in a way that made her feel like she might cry happy tears. The plane began flying over the Cascade Mountains, and the view was unlike anything Jessica had ever seen. Snow-capped peaks stretched as far as she could see, with deep valleys and pristine lakes scattered between them. It was so beautiful it almost didn't look real. "Jessica, you changed my life in ways you probably don't even realize," David's voice said as they flew over a particularly stunning mountain lake. "Before I met you, I was so focused on building my business that I had forgotten what it felt like to connect with another person. I had relationships, but they were never real. They were always about what I could provide or what someone wanted from me. But with you, everything is different. You cared about me when I was just a guy who had collapsed at an airport. You spent time with me in a hospital when you could have been anywhere else. You got to know me as David, not as the CEO of an airline. And you made me remember what it feels like to be genuinely happy." The plane was now flying along the coast, and Jessica could see the Pacific Ocean stretching endlessly to the horizon. Waves crashed against rocky cliffs below, and small coastal towns dotted the shoreline like something out of a postcard. "I brought you up here today because I wanted to show you how the world looks from this perspective," David continued. "From up here, everything looks different. Problems that seem huge on the ground look small. Boundaries that seem impossible to cross look easy. And things that seem far apart look like they're meant to be together." Jessica was crying now, but they were definitely happy tears. She had never had anyone say such beautiful things to her, and she had never felt so loved and cherished. The plane began to descend toward a small airport that Jessica didn't recognize. As they approached the runway, she could see David in the pilot's seat for the first time during the flight. He was wearing his pilot's uniform and looked incredibly handsome and confident. When the plane landed and came to a stop, David emerged from the cockpit with the biggest smile Jessica had ever seen on his face. He walked over to her seat and took her hands in his. "How was your first flight with Captain Thompson?" he asked with a grin. "Amazing," Jessica said, still wiping tears from her eyes. "But I'm still not sure what all of this is about." David's expression became more serious, though he was still smiling. "Jessica, 6 months ago you missed the most important flight of your life to help me. Today I want to ask you to take the most important flight of mine." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Jessica's heart started pounding as she realized what was happening. "Jessica Williams, you are the kindest, most genuine, most amazing person I have ever met. You love me for who I am, not for what I have. You make me want to be a better person every single day. Will you marry me and take this journey through life together?" He opened the box to reveal a beautiful but not overly flashy engagement ring. It was perfect, elegant and meaningful without being showy, just like their entire relationship had been. Jessica looked at David, then at the ring, then back at David's hopeful, nervous face. 6 months ago, she had been a struggling business owner rushing to catch a flight. Now she was sitting in a private jet with the man she loved, who had just proposed to her in the most romantic way she could have ever imagined. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course." "Yes." David slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her, and Jessica felt like she was still flying even though the plane had landed. As they held each other in the cabin of the small jet, Jessica couldn't help but think about how strange and wonderful life could be. Sometimes missing a flight doesn't mean missing an opportunity. Sometimes it means finding something even better than what you were looking for in the first place. "So," David said as they finally pulled apart, "ready for the rest of our adventure together?" "With Atir, you?" Jessica said, looking at her new engagement ring sparkling in the afternoon sunlight. I'm ready for anything.